Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Editor 2014. So, this is a film that, while watching this, it kind of breaks down as kind of like an airplane kind of movie to me. It kind of breaks down as a movie that I laugh while watching it just because I think it's just so goofy or so weird or so odd. Um, this movie to me, I went and I was I was reminded of this film while going into Tubi TUBI to go and check this movie out, so I can remember to say that because I forget that very often to let people know where to go to see this film. Uh, you can see for free. There's just go into Tubi. Free, you can watch any number of things, retro style, whichever. So, Tubi, or The Editor. So, this movie is about a movie that is all of a sudden to start losing its stars. How could you say that is to happen? Because people are starting to die while this film is getting made. So, there's this consistent scrambling of okay, we need to let's have this person be the let's have this person who looks let's do this now. Let's try. But this movie to me, yeah, there might be some gory moments that might, or some moments that might turn people off in this film, which is perfectly fine. Hopefully you don't come back here and I saw this movie and this movie is a awful experience that I will never go into again. Well, that's fine. To me, I find this movie to be goofy, and goofy might be a bad thing for someone to hear or for me to say to someone. But I was going into another channel, and while every once in a while, I'll go into another channel and watch a review, and then it'll immediately make me think of some other film or 12 other films that I already knew exist. To me, also, if you guys do not know, this movie kind of does seem familiar to a movie that I've reviewed before called Finding Bliss. Because this is an editor movie and that's an editor film, where we have a girl who's to forcibly edit adult films, and then eventually she ends up going and finding love. It's kind of one of those romance movies, but I just every once in a while. Here's the thing: people just need to just get out of their comfort zone. Review everything. Review anything. Review it all. See it. See everything. See the world. And that's what this movie entails: to just see the world. Because this movie may seem cheap to people or whichever. This movie to some people may seem like an artsy movie. Some people may not even understand why I review this, but F it. We'll do it. We're at an F it moment in our lives. So, check out this movie. So, the goofy parts, let's go into them. So, at a lot of points here, there is to be guys who are just having a dialogue moment in one room. And so all of a sudden we keep having people that are just all of a sudden just disrobing before our eyes and bizarrely doing these aerobics. They're just flexing, and they're stretching, and I'm oh my god, this is so random. I'm seeing one woman's batucus, or her money makers, let's just say. And I'm seeing one guy just freaking just swing his dang around, if you know what I'm saying. There's one point in this movie where there's a bunch of people coming out of the shower, and they're hey, wow, nice scene that you have there, if you know what I mean. So, and we have one guy telling one another, it's wow, that's a magnificent wang you got there. It's just what the okay, all right, just turn to somebody and be wow, that's a magnificent wang you got there. Just okay, oakley dokley. But I had fun during this movie. We have at one point where one detective is to accidentally kill his wife, and he is to try to pin it on this other detective, and just be oh, Giancarlo, it's oh, let me get you a beer, Giancarlo, and then all of a sudden it's oh, hey, well, I guess you're drunk now. Like, wow, you shouldn't, like, if anything, like, you can see that I'm not drunk. Like, I just like to hold the beer. Like, so, like, the one funny part in this movie is to have them kind of consistently bring up the fact that there had been this editor called Ray who had done this movie previously called I Need a Woman. And so the scene just breaks down as some random guy running into a church saying, I need a woman! I need a woman! And all of a sudden, like, this nun runs over and she's just like, well, I'm a woman underneath these clothes. I'm a woman. Just like, just the weirdest, like, things that, like, and all of a sudden, like, we have a priest in this movie who's like, I loved that movie. It's like, God, just what the fuck? It's fun. Like, we have all of a sudden the detective who's doing some, like, background research on the editor to eventually find that he's to meet a woman that is to not need a man, that's for sure. But she is just consistently say, like, kiss me, kiss me. And so the detective grabs her and kisses her. And then all of a sudden the woman bites him. And then we have, like, the doctor coming in. It's like, oh, so you fell for the kiss me, bite me thing. Oh, well, like, you fell, the classic trope. Like what the... Like, this movie is fun. This movie is fun. Man, it's a goofy film, but it's a fun film. I'm kind of giving this movie away because probably there's going to be zero interest into this, in all honesty, but what the heck. Like, we're at, like, F it territory, and if people like this movie, thank God, because hopefully I could just have something else out there as content. But I'm going to go out of my way to say that this movie is fun, and I think a lot of people forget about that. They're just like, oh, well, yeah, but this movie didn't make sense, or this movie was weird, or whatever. Like, it's just, like, go in here and have a laugh. It doesn't matter how goofy it looks. It doesn't matter how weird this movie is. Like, go in here and just have a laugh. There's this one, like, Scooby-Doo moment that they have in this movie, and it just kind of backfires, but it also seems hilarious. But I'll get to that in spoilers. I'll get to that one in spoilers. So, hopefully, because there's a lot of stuff, like, coming out of this film. And so with that said, I think I'm going to go out of my way to say that it is that coveted time to go into spoiler territory for this film, if I haven't already, pretty much. But let's go into this. Let's go into that double 5-time territory and just say, hey, man, have fun. But if you don't like this one, then that's perfectly fine. It's weird. It's goofy. It has a guy who takes a bunch of dirt and slaps it all over his face and, like, and just yells out to the skies. He does that plenty of times with other things, bizarrely, like birthday cake and like, I don't know what his bizarre-ish thing is that he has to, like, prah, all over a woman and then, like, grab a bunch of dirt and, like, put it all over his face. It's like, ah! That's the weird part of this movie, folks. Let's go into the weirdness of the editor. Because I think it's that time, yet again, to go into spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time we get to spoil this movie. Fun. Have fun. Have fun watching this film. If you've never heard it before, check it out and you'll just be like, why? Because have a good time. That's all you gotta do. So, let's go into spoilers now. So, we have a movie here that is I'm not quite exactly sure what the movie is. Like, is it a slasher movie? Is it a detective film? Like, I'm not quite sure. Like, I want to kind of, like, make it be, like, some kind of detective film, because that's what it, like, seems to break down as. So, weirdly enough, and I'm not exactly quite sure, like, because when breaking down this movie, it seems like Ray is seemingly haunted by something. But, like, we are to have assumed or assessed that that might be the killer, or maybe, like, there is some kind of killer in here somewhere, and eventually we do find out, seemingly in one way or another, who quite possibly the killer or killers are in this film. But it just comes to like break down in a very odd like manner. So, anyways, like I'm gonna in a roundabout way review this film, and I hope people will be okay with that. So we have this scene where like there's an early part that is gonna happen with this like detective film where uh where there's a one scene where there is to be a detective that is going to be Claudio, and we have the editor's wife who is to be Josephine, who is to be just enamored with Claudio. Just like, oh my god, like this actor is just the best. And so we have like Josephine who's like fantasizing about Claudio and wanting to leave her husband for Claudio and all kinds of things. She's just enamored with him to the point of her just watching movies that Claudio was in, just going like, oh, just Claudio. So Claudio is to go and be a detective with a guy named Cal. And so they're to investigate this dead body. And so we have Cal giving this goofy delivery of a line. Just like, she's dead, she's dead. Like, she's dead. And Claudio's like, yes, she is dead. Like, like he had like the goofy delivery and lines of which that they go with this movie. And so eventually there is some goofy looking slasher murderer character that is in the background, and like that's just one of the cuts of the scene. So what ends up happening is we eventually have like this movie being put together, and so eventually we have Claudio who is getting the cut of the film from the editor to just kind of see how the film is going. So Claudio is putting on a devil mask and like scaring Ray, and then going and trying to get the film to kind of see the dailies. So Claudio is going and sleeping with this girl, who I guess is to be part of the film, and he is just so much into himself that he just wants to see the movie and not see this woman disrobing before his very eyes, and like basically saying that, hey, like we can sleep together, and but Claudio is just like, no, like look at me, look at the film. Like he's so into himself, it's ridiculous. But so that ends up having the killer going and striking and killing Claudio. And so that immediately gets a detective that is to come in here, a detective called Peter Peter something. I don't remember his actual name. Because it doesn't exactly say the whole thing. So Peter comes in here and starts like accusing people, and so immediately he starts to accuse the editor, who is Ray, who had lost some of his fingers and now has this like prosthetic hand. And so Peter had mentioned that that Ray had spent some time in a mental hospital, and Ray was like, no, like I spent time in a normal hospital, but I can see how you can get confused by that. Because supposedly what had happened is that Ray's wife, Josephine, had been, like, let go from a movie at, like, the worst possible time in Ray's life. So all of a sudden, like, Ray was just so focused on his film editing job that when he was to eventually go and start cutting some of his clips, all of a sudden his fingers got a little bit too close to this cutting board, and he chopped his fingers off because he was just like so like just lost, like his brain wasn't firing correctly because of all the stuff that he was just worried about. So and so I guess he had spent some time at a hospital, and Peter goes off to confirm that. So Peter goes off to this hospital that is to all of a sudden have a woman desperately want to kiss him but then bite him. And so we have this doctor come in, who's to be Dr. Cassini. And so this doctor is to tell the backstory of Ray and that he had spent some time there. And so Peter is like, it seems like Ray had been giving me a different story. I think he's giving me the runaround. So, uh, so what ends up happening is we end up having Peter's wife, who I guess was working on this movie, who was to eventually go and find the murdered bodies of Claudio and the woman that he was with. And so we have this woman who is to now be blind because of what she had seen. And so, but supposedly this blindness is only going to quite possibly be temporary. So, but Peter is bizarrely this man who is to eventually go and have women that he does odd, bizarre-like things. Because eventually, Peter is to go walking out of the studio and bump into Cal, which is this sidekick of this movie. And he's like, hey, man, like, it seems like eventually things are going to, like, start working out for me. I can't, like, wait till I just keep on, like getting any number of roles, because what ends up happening is they end up replacing Claudio with a guy named Cesare. And Cesare is a guy who doesn't sound like Claudio. If anything, like, he has an accent, and like he barely looks like Claudio. And so Cesare is eventually going and doing a scene where they are to do this like Scooby-Doo thing, where they're to basically take off supposedly the mask of a woman to say that like the whole entire time it was so-and-so person, but like instead of this one woman. But what ends up happening is they actually just rip off this woman's skin, and they're like, whoops. And so they just go and they just slap the skin back on this woman, and they're just like, whoops, I guess we made a mistake here. And it's like, yeah, I guess she wasn't the culprit this whole entire time. Whoops. So what ends up happening is eventually Claudio or Cesare, yeah, there we go. Cesare is to eventually go on to eventually come out of this shower and eventually come out of this spot like killed. And so now they're forcibly having to have Cal be the Claudio like character, and now Claudio and Cesaro were supposed to be built as Cal's sidekick. And so Cal is like, yeah, I'm having my big break. And so all of a sudden he has like this trunk of a back car with all these knives and chainsaws and all these things, and that looks peculiar. And then when Peter is to come out there to greet Cal, that's where I was going with this. Eventually, Cal bumps into a girl that he used to like sleep with before, and bizarrely, there's this scene of both Peter and this girl going off on into this park somewhere, and it's raining, and so Peter is taking this mud and just slapping it all over this girl, tearing her shirt, and then he's taking this mud and slapping it all over himself, and he's like, ah! and so, like, we're gonna find out that this guy does this frequently, and so, but anyways, eventually Cal later on will go and sleep with this girl, and like Cal will want to know every like detail of how like Peter would treat this girl intimately, and then all of a sudden, like Cal will fantasize that this girl is actually Peter. But pushing on, so Ray, who is the editor, is to seemingly almost have this relationship with his female editor, where it seems like she's trying to press him to have this be more than just a normal relationship. And Ray is like, no, like I'm a married man. Like, no, this is wrong. And so she's like, this young girl, this young thing is like pressing on him, and he's like, no, like we can't. And so, but eventually, like Ray is to go home to have his wife just like treat him like garbage. Like, so, like, Ray is to go home to like talk with his wife, and like his wife is watching like this footage that Ray was to have of Cal and the blonde haired guy, and so Josephine is like, "Oh my God, this Cal guy is even better than Claudio!" Like, oh my God! And so all of a sudden, like Ray is just like, come on, like Cal is probably like the worst actor. And eventually Ray tries to go out of his way to edit out Cal completely from the movie. And eventually Cal like finds that out, and all of a sudden he is going to kill Ray for editing him out of the picture because that's not what technically the studio guy wanted. So like the studio guy is just like, okay, this guy's gonna be the new lead and do that now. And so Ray tried to edit like Cal out of this film. And so, but Josephine is to like be, she's watching this like this video of Cal, and she's getting really into it. And so all of a sudden when Cal is just scream in the movie, like Josephine is just scream out like, ah, like, because like she's just like, oh my God, this Cal is just, oh. So, and Ray is like conflicting with what she's saying, and so like, and so Josephine is just so upset with her husband. So eventually both Ray and Josephine are to go out to dinner, and so all of a sudden like Josephine is treating Ray like crap about all the like the stuff that they can order at this restaurant and whichever. And so it just gets to the point where Josephine is treating Ray so much like crap that all of a sudden Peter is to meet Ray and kind of overhear what Josephine had said. And so all of a sudden Peter just goes and just starts decking like Josephine and just tells like Ray like you need to be a more dominant husband. Maybe like maybe a good slapping once in a while of your wife would have her change her tune about you, Ray. And so Peter walks off, and Josephine's like, yeah, like, what do you expect me to do, Ray? Slap myself? I'm like, what the fuck? Like, oh my God. This is ridiculous, but it's hilarious. And the same bizarre-ish, like, yeah, Ray, what do you expect me to do? Slap myself? Yes. Eventually, Peter mentions again to somebody how like Ray like should like get up the courage to slap his wife. I'm just like, why do we keep going back to this? It's so weird. So, anyways, so we push on, and so Cal is now really upset that the editor is to try and take Cal out of the picture. And so Cal goes and grabs this editor, and Cal has lost his mind. So he's going and being tempted to take a chainsaw to this editor and just like, put me back in the film, editor. And so like Cal has his chainsaw so close to Ray, and Ray is basically just telling Cal, like, you know why I edited you out of this film? Because you can't act. Like, whatever you're doing is not acting. And plus, every single time that I'm to see that you are acting, bizarrely you do this blinking thing that makes no sense to me. And, like, I can't in rational mind have you be in this film. And so, but eventually, like, Cal is threatening this editor so badly that that eventually Ray is to give in to Cal and have him be in this film. So eventually Cal is to go with his woman and make love, uh, like while thinking of bizarrely Peter the detective, and whichever one have you. So after this love making session, all of a sudden we have the killer coming in with a chainsaw to chainsaw up Cal's woman that he's with, but then also go after Cal with this chainsaw. And so what Cal ends up doing is all of a sudden he ends up like taking the most flimsiest things to protect himself against this chainsaw. He ends up bringing in this like lamp that would not make sense to defend himself. He all of a sudden grabs this plant to defend himself, and then he chucks that aside. Then all of a sudden he uses his hands as like this chopping thing, and is like gonna be like, yeah, like come on, like I will defend myself against this chainsaw. I'm like, man, this feels like Student Bodies, where you have the guy coming in like just consistently angry about gum, and is like is like doing that like throughout the entire film. That's the murderer, like with his voice the whole entire thing. And so like the goofiest movie, but freaking hilarious also. If you've never seen Student Bodies, that movie's freaking funny. And a lot of people could not feel that, but like I thought that movie was goofy and funny. Like somebody gets killed with an eggplant. It's freaking hilarious. Check that out. So I think it's like the 1981 Student Bodies, whichever. Moving on. So eventually, what ends up happening is that Cal is to have still been alive, and eventually Cal is to now like be told by Peter that the one way to probably get to Ray the most is to go through his wife to get to him. And so Cal's like, that's a brilliant idea. And I'm going to have to pause here for a second to do a little bit of a reset. All right. So what Cal ends up doing is, so there is a fire, like a campfire, and so Cal grabs Ray and then has Josephine where Ray can see. And so Ray is to go and to feel like he's going to hurt Ray by basically forcing himself upon Josephine. And so we have Cal, who is just going at it with Josephine, and then all of a sudden Josephine is looking at Ray and how he's just like, there's nothing that he's gonna actually do. And so Josephine is just like, well, F it, like I'm gonna get back at him, and I'm just gonna look like I'm gonna enjoy this just so that way I can hurt him even more. And so Josephine is like really getting into this, and Cal is not expecting this. And he's just like, no, don't get into this. Like, no, like, so, like all of a sudden, like Cal is just like done, like doing it with Josephine. And so Cal just like goes to Ray and he's like, I'm sorry, man. Like, I'm sorry. And so like Cal walks off, and then so Josephine is like, yes, like, now me and him are lovers, and I'm leaving you, Ray. I'm leaving you. So Ray's like, you guys aren't lovers, and like Josephine is like, yes, like we just made love and this and that. And so Josephine is never going to leave Ray. It's never going to happen. But anyways, so eventually the other editor, the other female editor, is to die. Because what ends up happening is that they have the killer come in and take this girl and basically take scissors to her and kill her. And funny enough, they just like take her body and then like just like drag her out of this spot. And also they decide, ooh, let's get to the, like, before we get to the new editor thing, let's get to like the goofy part, another goofy part. So Peter is to eventually be at home, and all of a sudden he is to make love with his wife, and a wife who is blind. So what he ends up doing is he ends up taking this bottle, and he ends up like breaking the bottle, and a ton of the bottle pieces just get slathered onto like this woman's chest. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, and this woman's just okay with this. And so all of a sudden, like, Peter is to like cut this woman's dress open, which does kind of cut this woman, but like it seems fine afterwards, shortly thereafter. Like the wound is gone bizarrely. So Peter is to all of a sudden like go and like again like have this birthday cake that was laying around. And so like Peter goes and like slaps the birthday cake all over his wife, slaps the birthday cake on his face, and he's like, ah, again, bizarre, weird, and so forth. And so eventually all of a sudden we have this sound that is going on in this house to lead both the detective and his wife to go and scramble throughout the house. So all of a sudden, Peter's wife is to be locked into this bathroom, and like she's screaming for her husband. And so what Peter decides to do is grab an axe and try to open this door, or try to get to see what's going on by putting an axe in this door. And so Peter is telling his wife, like, get away from the door, and while he brings an axe through this door. And so we just have this killer that is now like so strong compared to this woman. She's to like grab, or he or she is to grab this woman and to like press her head against this door. And so Peter is eventually like continually trying to swing to like try to get to his wife, and he ends up getting to her with this axe in her head. So she falls over, the killer is to be bizarrely gone, and so all of a sudden Peter is like, oh my god. Like, so Peter's like, oh my god, I killed my wife. Well, like, let's go and take this axe out of her head. Maybe like we can clean this off, and it might not just be like, I don't know. So all of a sudden, also Peter is taking this girl's like hand and like chopping off the fingers and like feeding the fingers to his dog bizarrely. I guess to like just like say that oh yeah, it was the killer, he did it. Like, yeah, so, or it was Ray, he did it, he killed her. So all of a sudden we have a police officer who is to come in, and like Peter is to mention that he's a detective on this case. And like, why is like Giancarlo here? So all of a sudden, like Peter is giving like Giancarlo this axe, and now like Peter's to say like, hey, your fingerprints are on the axe. Maybe you're the killer. And it's like Giancarlo, Giancarlo is just like, no, so like Peter is also getting like Giancarlo drunk and just saying like, hey, like, why are you drinking on the job? Like, hey, like, you can see me, like, I'm just holding this beer because I'm a man and I hold beer. And so like we have like Peter who is just trying to manipulate this guy like a mother to basically have him corroborate Peter's story that it was the killer who had killed his wife, and that he had saw some shadowy figure that had been in this house. And so like Giancarlo is like, okay, yeah, like I'll corroborate that story. Like I think I did see something. And so like persuading Peter to have that same backstory to keep Peter in the clear. So all of a sudden we have Ray, who is to finish a bulk of this movie and to finish the editing of this film. But the studio exec was going to fire Ray and put a new editor in, but sadly enough, eventually this new editor just ends up getting killed regardless. And so eventually this just pushes on to eventually having Ray like have finished most of this film. And so what ended up eventually happening at the end of this is that Peter is to eventually go and eventually try to figure out who the murderer is. And he at first, for the longest time, thought it was Ray, but eventually they find out that it's actually Josephine because she had been fired before from another previous movie, so she wanted to seek revenge and all these people and so on and so forth. Cal had killed a number of people like Claudio and Cesare, so that way he can get a bigger part in this film. So technically, both Cal and Josephine were both killers of this spot, of this place, of this whatever. So, and also, like, we have Peter who is eventually go through uh, this time of figuring this out. And so Peter is to run to Ray to try to protect him, and eventually that leads to eventually Josephine going and wanting to like basically just kill Ray or kill the detective or whichever. And so that leads to having Ray after having these like bizarrish like dreams of this this blackened like person that at some point or another looks like him, and like he's having these nightmares and whichever. Eventually that all leads to eventually Ray going and having to defend himself against his own wife, and that eventually leads uh to Peter just going and pouring gasoline all over Josephine, and Josephine's like, yeah, pour more of it on me, pour it on. And so Ray is to eventually go and try to like light a match to go and kill Josephine, but like he is having problems trying to light it. So what he ends up doing is he ends up like burning his prosthetic hand to light Josephine, and then so Josephine ends up getting lit, and then she ends up getting like, of course, dead after that because she can't survive that kind of like burn and whatever. So Josephine is to die because she's freaking crazy, and so Peter is to solve this whole case, and eventually also Peter is to lose the same amount of fingers that that Ray had, and so like we eventually have like Peter who's gonna try to do something with like his one hand, and then he's like, oh, I forgot I lost all these fingers on this hand. So Peter is to eventually at some points in this movie talk to his superior, and like his superior is to mention that maybe that Peter needs to take some time off, or maybe he needs to go and see someone or something like that. So Peter is to eventually supposedly solve this case, and then all of a sudden he's talking with his boss, and all of a sudden he is to find out that the doctor that had been in the very beginning of this movie wasn't actually the doctor. He was actually the detective, and Peter was just like a person that was not all quite sane and whatever. And so like the whole part of this has all of a sudden just drastically changed for whatever reason that it needs to be. So all of a sudden Peter is going on some mission to go and find some like Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of moment, where he is to find some skeleton and find this film, and to be able to just kind of bizarrely like finish up this movie uh with this just bizarrish like fact finding mission of this guy like realizing that he was like crazy this whole entire time and whatever. So Yeah, so like a weird, bizarre-ish ending. Like I kind of phoned it in for the ending of here. Plus, I also took way too much time talking about this movie, like 40 minutes. So, in a roundabout way, I went out of my way to like review a bulk of this film, but like towards the end there, I really started to like, I don't remember exactly everything, but like that's how it all just kind of just played out. So, with that said, like I've seen like movies like Close Calls and like stuff like that where it's bizarrish movies, but when looking at it, like there was something that I was just like, nah, like there was something that I got out of it. Maybe it was like a pretty much like no clothed woman or whichever. But yeah, this movie was bizarre, but at the end of the day, I laughed at it. Like there was times where I laughed during this movie, and I think that's all that I needed to have. So with that said, I'm gonna get the heck out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.